My name is Roy Mercer. I'm 26 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I sat in a conference room in downtown Columbus while my entire family divided up a dead man's life like they were splitting a dinner check. My grandfather, Roy Mercer, built something real in this world. He wasn't flashy about it. He wore the same brand of work boots for 30 years, drove a Ford F-150 until the thing had 200,000 miles on it, and still packed his lunch every single morning, even after the company he built from. Nothing had 40 employees and 6 figures in monthly revenue. He was the most grounded man I ever knew. And on the day his attorney read his will, not one person in that room cried. They were too busy doing math in their heads. I was the odd one out before I even walked through the door. My Uncle Dale had been positioning himself as the obvious heir for years, 15 years as operations director. Titles, connections, a leather briefcase he brought to every family dinner, like he was always one step away from a boardroom. My cousin, Brianna, had the credentials, the MBA from Ohio State, the tech startup she wouldn't stop talking about. And my mother, Sharon, she'd sold her condo 6 months before Grandpa passed and quietly moved into a smaller apartment across town. Nobody talked about why. Nobody asked. Our family communicated through subtext and silence, and everyone had gotten very good at both. I was the one who sold furniture, literally. I managed a mid-size furniture store called Harlan & Reed in Marysville, Ohio, population 11,000. I never finished my business degree. I left during my sophomore year, and if you asked anyone in my family why, they'd shrug and say Callie just wasn't cut out for it. What they wouldn't tell you, because they didn't know, was that I left to take care of Roy. He'd had a mild stroke in January of my sophomore year. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that he needed someone there every morning. My mother said the facility could handle it. Dale said he was too busy. Brianna was 3 semesters deep into her MBA and couldn't miss class. I drove 40 minutes each way, every single day, for 4 months. I sorted his medication. I drove him to physical therapy 3 times a week. I read him the newspaper because the stroke had temporarily blurred his vision in one eye. I did it quietly, without asking for recognition, and I never went back to finish my degree. Roy recovered fully. His doctor called it one of the better recoveries he'd seen in a man his age, and life moved on. I went back to Marysville, took the manager position at the furniture store. Roy went back to running Mercer Land and Development. And the family went back to forgetting I existed until I was useful. The morning of the will reading, I put on the only blazer I owned, drove my Honda to Columbus, and parked next to Dale's Cadillac Escalade. He was already out front talking on the phone, one hand braced against the hood of his car like he was posing for an advertisement. Brianna arrived in an Uber with her husband Marcus, who carried a leather folder under his arm. My mother came with her sister, Patrice. They were laughing when they walked up. I don't know what was funny. I didn't ask. The attorney's name was Gerald Holt. He had the kind of calm that only comes from delivering difficult news for a living. He waited until everyone was seated. He opened the folder, and then he started reading. Dale received the vacation property in Lake Erie and $800,000 in cash. He nodded like someone had just confirmed his coffee order. My mother received the Columbus condo Roy had kept as a rental and $600,000. She closed her eyes. I couldn't tell if it was gratitude or relief that a debt had been paid. Brianna and Marcus received $500,000 plus Roy's private investment accounts. Marcus opened his folder immediately. Brianna typed something into her phone before Gerald had finished the sentence. Then Gerald turned to the last page, and to my granddaughter, Callie Ann Mercer. He said it slowly. Every head turned toward me. One sealed envelope, to be delivered directly and opened only by the named recipient. He slid a yellowed envelope across the table. My name on the front in Roy's handwriting. The ink slightly faded. This wasn't written recently. I broke the seal. 1 sheet of paper. A 10-digit phone number in Roy's careful block print. Below it, 4 words. Call when you're ready. RM. That was it. No check. No property, no account number. The silence lasted about 3 seconds before Dale broke it. He let out a low whistle, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Well, I'll be." Grandpa left Callie a hotline. A couple of cousins laughed. My mother turned away, but I saw her shoulders shake. Brianna looked at me with an expression caught somewhere between pity and satisfaction, the way people look when something they privately expected finally happens in public. She patted my hand across the table. "I'm sure it means something," she said. "Maybe he set up a college fund for you. Better late than never." I held the envelope in both hands and said nothing. In the parking lot afterward, my mother caught up to me before I reached my car. She touched my arm like she was flagging down a passing stranger. "Callie," she said, "I think Dad knew you weren't ready for real responsibility. That number is probably some kind of financial advisor for people who need help getting on their feet." She said it gently, like she was doing me a favor. "Call it. Get some guidance." She adjusted her purse and walked toward Patrice's car. Dale appeared behind her. He put one hand on the roof of my Honda, casual, deliberate. "Listen," he said, "if that envelope has anything to do with the company, that runs through me. I've been operations director for 15 years. I built that business alongside your grandfather." He tapped the roof twice. "If there's something in there that affects the company, I expect you to come to me first." He walked away before I could respond. Inside Brianna's Uber, I heard her laughing. My phone buzzed. The family group chat I'd been muted on for 8 months. Brianna's message. "Update. Callie got an envelope. Just an envelope. 3 laughing emojis from a cousin. A heart react from my mother. I got in my car. I locked the door. I set the envelope on the passenger seat and stared at it. Roy's handwriting looked up at me. "Call when you're ready." My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something harder to name. The feeling you get when every person who was supposed to love you just proved in one afternoon that they don't. And you're alone in a parking lot trying to decide whether to trust the one person who still did. I picked up my phone and dialed. It rang twice. A man's voice, unhurried. Professional. "Miss Mercer, I've been expecting your call." I gripped the steering wheel. "Who is this?" "My name is Paul Sheridan. Your grandfather appointed me as trustee 20 years ago. We need to meet in person. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office in Columbus. Bring your license, birth certificate, and your social security card. Before I tell you what Paul Sheridan said to me in that office, I want to say something. Because that moment, sitting in that parking lot with every person I grew up, with treating me like the joke of the afternoon, that was the moment everything in my life divided into before and after. If you've ever had someone look right past you when you needed them to see you, you know exactly what that parking lot felt like. Stay with me and hit subscribe, because what comes next changes everything. Paul Sheridan's office was on the 4th floor of a limestone building on East Broad Street. No glass tower, no flashy lobby, just a brass nameplate, a receptionist who knew my name when I walked in, and a small office lined with law books and framed photographs. One of them stopped me cold. 2 men standing in front of a half-constructed building, both grinning, both holding hard hats. Roy, maybe 50 years old, and beside him a younger Paul Sheridan, holding a rolled set of blueprints. "That was 1998, Paul said from behind his desk. "The first commercial project we ever worked on together. Roy did the building. I did the paperwork. We never stopped." He opened a leather binder and placed a set of documents on the desk between us. "In 2003, your grandfather established an irrevocable trust. I am the appointed trustee. This trust is a completely separate legal instrument from the will that was read yesterday. It does not pass through probate. It is not part of the estate. It cannot be modified or dissolved by any challenge to the will." He paused. "Let that settle. The trust holds 100% ownership of Mercer Land and Development LLC. All operating assets, all active development contracts, all long-term investment accounts. Current estimated value, approximately $36 million. I didn't move. The number just sat in the air between us and I didn't reach for it. "Why me?" I asked. "I don't have a business degree. I manage a furniture store in a town of 11,000 people." Paul took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Roy said something to me when he set this up. He said, 'The one who shows up when everything is hard and asks for nothing in return. That's who I trust with what I built.' He watched his family for 20 years, Callie. He said you were the only one who showed up when he fell." He slid a signature page across the desk. You have 30 days to accept or decline. If you accept, ownership transfers immediately. There is also a personal letter from Roy, but it can only be opened after you sign. I looked at the signature line. I looked at the photograph on the wall. Two men building something from nothing. I need a day, I said. Paul nodded. Roy expected you to say that. That evening, my phone lit up like a circuit board. Dale sent a long message to the group chat about his plans to pursue temporary management authority over the company. Brianna replied immediately, "Agreed." Any trust can be challenged on grounds of diminished capacity. He was 80 years old with a stroke history. My mother messaged me privately at 11 at night. "Callie, I'm trying to help you. You don't have the money to fight lawyers. Just tell us what was in that envelope. We'll handle it together as a family." I read every message. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I laid out my documents on my kitchen table: license, birth certificate, social security card, set my alarm for 6:30, and went to sleep. I signed the acceptance documents the next morning. Paul slid a second envelope across the desk. Cream-colored. Roy's handwriting, slightly shakier than the phone number. He wrote this more recently. I opened it carefully. One page, Callie. I've watched this family for a long time and I love every one of them. But I know who will build and who will burn through. You were the only one who came when I fell. You drove 40 minutes every morning for 4 months. You sorted my pills. You read me the paper when my eyes couldn't hold a line. Everyone else showed up for Christmas. You showed up in January. I'm not leaving you money. I'm leaving you responsibility. That's the only inheritance worth having. Take care of what I built. And take care of yourself first. Roy. I folded the letter and held it in both hands. The paper smelled faintly like sawdust. I don't know how that was possible. But it did. The following Saturday, Paul sent formal notice to the full family through Roy's original estate attorney. A meeting at Roy's house. 2 p.m., everyone showed up. Dale took Roy's armchair before anyone else had sat down. He spread his legs out, draped one arm over the rest, and leaned over to my mother. "She'll back down," he said quietly. "Not quiet enough. She'll hand it over." I walked through the front door at exactly 2 o'clock. Behind me, a man none of them had ever seen. 65 years old, silver hair, gray vest, a leather briefcase older than most people in the room. Dale sat up straight. "Who's this?" "This is Paul Sheridan," I said. "My attorney." Brianna's face changed before the sentence finished. She said the name slowly, like she was placing it. Paul Sheridan. She turned to her husband, Marcus. He did the legal work for Roy's original acquisitions back in the 90s. Marcus quietly closed his folder. Paul set his briefcase on the coffee table, unclasped it, and removed a stack of documents. He didn't sit down until everyone else had gone quiet. In 2003, Roy Mercer established an irrevocable trust. I am the appointed trustee. This trust is entirely separate from the will that was read last week. It does not pass through probate. It is not part of the estate. It cannot be affected by any challenge to the will. He paused. The trust holds 100% ownership of Mercer Land and Development, LLC, including all operating assets, development contracts, and long-term investment accounts. Current estimated value, approximately $36 million. The sole beneficiary is Callie Ann Mercer. She signed the acceptance documents 2 days ago. Ownership transferred immediately upon her signature. Nobody moved. Dale's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Then he was on his feet. The armchair scraped back hard across the hardwood. "This is fraud." His voice broke on the last word. My father was not in his right mind. He was 80 years old. He had a stroke. He was being manipulated by a girl who hung around his house playing the good granddaughter. Paul reached into his briefcase and placed 3 folders on the table. Roy completed independent mental capacity evaluations in 2003, 2013, and 2022. All 3 conducted by board-certified physicians with no connection to the family. Fully documented and notarized. He slid them forward. "You're welcome to review them." Dale didn't touch the folders. He pointed at me across the table. "I ran that company for 15 years. I built the operations infrastructure. I managed the teams. I showed up every single day. And you want to give it to someone who sells furniture in Marysville?" His voice was cracking around the edges now. The kind of fracture that happens when someone realizes the story they've been telling themselves for years just stopped being true. Brianna stood. She knocked her knee on the coffee table and didn't seem to notice. "So we get a few $100,000, she said, and she gets 36 million? She doesn't have a degree. She left school. She manages a retail store in a town nobody's heard of." Her voice had climbed into a register I'd never heard from her before. She looked at Marcus. "We can contest this." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at his legal pad, then at Paul, then back at Brianna. "The trust is irrevocable," he said, "and there's a no contest clause. If we challenge it, our inheritance under the will gets frozen until the court rules. Could be 2 to 3 years. He closed the legal pad slowly. "Brianna." "We should go." Brianna stood there another moment, looking around the room for someone to agree with her. She found no one. She grabbed her bag and walked out. Marcus followed without making eye contact with anyone. The front door didn't slam. It clicked shut, which was somehow worse. Dale stood alone near the fireplace for a long moment. Then he walked out through the back door. His wife stayed seated. She looked at me across the room with an expression I couldn't fully read. Then she stood, picked up her coat, and followed him without a word. My mother hadn't moved from the wingback chair near the window. Her mascara had blurred under one eye. She was staring at the carpet. The same carpet Roy had chosen 30 years ago because he liked how it felt under bare feet. She sat there while the rest of the cousins and aunts filtered out. Some avoided my eyes. One older cousin I barely knew stopped beside me, squeezed my shoulder once, and said nothing. Then it was just me, my mother, and Roy's sister Lorraine, who had driven down from Findlay and sat the whole time near the hallway, slightly apart from everyone else watching. My mother stood eventually. She smoothed her blouse. She walked past me and out the front door without a word. The car was waiting. Lorraine rose slowly. She was quiet in the way that people who read a lot are quiet, like they're always weighing things before they say them. She'd been sending me books in the mail since I was 12. Never a note, just the book. She stopped beside me and put her hand on my arm. "Roy used to say that the people who show up when nobody's watching are the ones worth building for." She patted my arm twice. Now I understand why he said it. Then she left. I stood alone in Roy's living room, his chair empty. The clock on the mantel ticking. Through the window I could see the workshop out back. Light off, door closed. I breathed out all the way. It was mine to take care of now. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple. Dale filed a motion to contest the trust within 10 days. His attorney argued diminished capacity, requested an emergency injunction. Paul responded with all 3 capacity evaluations, clean and notarized, from 3 separate decades. The court reviewed them in a preliminary hearing. The judge signaled the motion had no legal foundation. Meanwhile, the no contest clause activated. Dale's $800,000 in cash and the Lake Erie property were frozen pending resolution. His legal fees reached $70,000 in 8 weeks. I heard through Lorraine that his wife had quietly started sleeping in the guest room. I walked into Mercer Land and Development on a Monday morning. The company's operations director, a woman named Frances Cho, met me at the front entrance. She was direct, efficient, and had clearly made up her mind to give me a fair shot before forming an opinion. She walked me through every active project, 6 developments in progress, 2 contracts awaiting signature. 1 personnel matter that couldn't wait. Dale had placed 3 family members on the payroll in the last 2 years. One of them, his son Brandon, 23 years old, had a title of junior project coordinator, a salary, and hadn't visited a single job site in 9 months. What would Roy have done? I asked. 90-day performance review. Anyone who doesn't meet the benchmarks gets a fair severance and a clean exit. Do it, I said. Frances didn't blink. She'd expected that answer. 4 days later, Dale called. I heard about Brandon. His voice was tight. I hired him personally. Hasn't been to a single site in 9 months. That's documented. I'm not making an exception, Dale. You're doing this on purpose. I'm running a company. That's what Roy asked me to do. He threatened to sue. I told him calmly that the no contest clause was still in effect, that his estate inheritance was still frozen, and that his legal fees were continuing to climb. The line went quiet for a long time. Then he hung up. Brianna called 2 weeks later. Her voice was different. Flatter, the startup voice was gone. "Grant wants out," she said. "If the company folds, he's filing." I put almost all of the inheritance into our burn rate. We've got 40,000 left, and the product still works, but I can't scale without capital. "I know what I said. About the envelope. About you not being qualified. I meant it when I said it." She swallowed. "I was wrong." I let the silence do its work. "I'm not going to hand you money," I said. "But Mercer Land and Development is looking for a property management platform. Scheduling, maintenance tracking, tenant communications. If your product meets Francis's standards, you pitch it through the vendor process. Same as anyone else." "You'd let me pitch? I want you to compete, Brianna. If it's the best option, we sign. If it isn't, we don't." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'll have the deck to Francis by Friday." We sat on the phone without speaking for a moment. It was the most honest silence we'd ever shared. 3 months passed. Dale dropped the lawsuit. His attorney told him plainly there was no path forward. The trust was airtight. The capacity evaluations were untouchable. His legal fees had climbed past $90,000. The Lake Erie property and the cash inheritance remained frozen while the motion wound down. Brandon took his severance quietly and enrolled in a welding program out in Newark. Nobody pushed him. He chose it himself. My mother burned through her inheritance faster than I expected. A significant portion disappeared into debts she'd never disclosed to anyone. The rest went to appearances. A new car. Renovations to the smaller apartment that nobody needed to know was smaller. 4 months after the will reading, she called and asked if we could meet. She was at a diner off Route 37 when I arrived. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She ordered coffee. I ordered the same. "I spent almost everything," she said. "The divorce cost more than I ever told anyone. I used the inheritance to cover it. I have 50,000 left and no income coming in." I waited. "I'm not asking for money," she said. "I don't have anyone else to tell this to." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you're the only one who won't use it against me later." She stared at the table. "I was wrong about the envelope. I was wrong about what I said at Thanksgiving when I called you my disappointment in front of the whole family. I was wrong about most of it." I set my mug down. "I don't need you to apologize, Mom. I need you to stop telling people I'm your failure. When you talk about me, I need you to stop drawing that picture. That's my boundary." She nodded once. Stood. Put a 5 on the table. Walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned. "Roy was right about you." Then she was gone. It wasn't healing. But it was a crack where the light could get in. 5 months in, Francis dropped a folder on my desk. A proposal Roy had drafted 2 years before he died. A 28-unit affordable housing development in Marysville. The same town where I'd managed the furniture store. Where nobody had looked twice at me for years. Roy had wanted this built. Dale had killed it. Said the margins were too thin. Roy had shelved it but never deleted the file. There was a note in his handwriting on the cover page. "This is where it started. We should give something back. What would it take to revive it?" 14 months to build. About $3.5 million in capital. The land is already held by the trust. Roy bought the parcel in 2019. "It won't make us rich," Francis said, "but it'll house people who need it." "Approve it," I said. She raised an eyebrow. Roy's eyebrow, I thought, for half a second. "I'll have the team start site prep next week. We named it Roy's Corner." No press release, no ceremony. I drove to the lot on a Saturday morning, put on a hard hat, and walked the site with the construction foreman. A man named Eddie, who had been with Mercer Land and Development for 19 years. "Your grandfather walked every site like this," Eddie said, kicking at the dirt. "First one there, last one to leave. Used to drive Dale crazy because Roy would catch everything Dale missed." "Like what?" "Like everything." Eddie smiled without looking up. I stood at the edge of the lot and looked out across Marysville. The furniture store was 4 blocks east. My apartment was 6 blocks north. This was the town that had held me steady when my family wouldn't. Now I got to build something here. Roy would have liked that. 6 months after the will reading, Dale called. His voice was smaller, the kind of voice a man has when he's been alone in a house long enough. "I dropped the lawsuit." There's no case. I know, a long pause. My money's mostly gone. Fees and living expenses. He cleared his throat. I want to ask if there's a place for me at the company. I leaned back in my chair. You have 15 years of operations experience. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist, but you'll go through the same process as any outside candidate. Application, interview, reference check. No special title. No corner office. If you're hired, you start where the role fits. The line was quiet. And Dale. The inflated expense reports from the last few years. Francis flagged them. Roy knew. If you come back, that gets addressed formally through HR. Another pause. I understand. His voice caught. Callie, what I said at the meeting about Roy being confused at the end, about you not belonging at the table. He stopped. He wasn't confused. He was the clearest thinker in this family. I knew that. I just didn't want it to be true, because it meant he saw me clearly too. That was the most honest thing Dale Mercer had ever said out loud. Send your resume to HR, I said. And Dale, welcome to the process. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 6 months. 1 year later. Thanksgiving. Roy's house. My house now, technically, though it still doesn't feel right to say it that way. I kept everything the way he had it. The bookshelves. The rug he chose for how it felt under bare feet. The dining table he built himself from a reclaimed oak slab in 1989. His chair at the head of the table sat empty. A small jar of yellow chrysanthemums on the seat, his favorite. They used to grow wild along the workshop fence. My mother arrived early. She came into the kitchen without being invited and started cutting vegetables. It was the first time in over a decade she'd helped prepare a meal in this house. She didn't introduce me as the CEO to anyone. What she said was, Callie makes a better turkey than I ever did. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. Brianna and Marcus came together. The Mercer Land and Development pilot contract had converted to a full 2-year vendor agreement after Francis confirmed the platform cut maintenance response times by 29%. Brianna calls me Cal now. A small thing. But in a family that measures distance in syllables, it means something. Dale came alone. He went through the full hiring process, a panel interview, a skills assessment, reference checks. He was offered a senior operations coordinator position, not director. He took it without argument. Carol came back 2 months ago. They were in counseling. She drove here herself. Brandon came with his mother. He finished his welding program last month. He drove a truck he bought with his own paycheck. He shook my hand at the door. Nothing else needed to be said. Lorraine sat beside me at dinner. She squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, Roy's watching. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. After dinner, I slipped outside alone. Roy's workshop sat 20 yards behind this house. A simple building, corrugated metal roof, a sliding door that sticks in cold weather. I pulled the chain on the single bulb inside. Warm yellow light filled the space. Everything was exactly where he left it. Hand planes on the pegboard, sandpaper rolls sorted by grit, a workbench 8 feet long, maple top worn smooth from decades of the same hands pressing against the same surface. I pulled up his stool and sat. The room smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. It always has. It always will. As long as I keep the door closed and hold on to what he left inside it. I'm talking to you now. Whoever's listening at midnight or on a lunch break or driving somewhere long and flat and quiet. I didn't tell this story because of $36 million. That number is a responsibility, not a trophy. The thing I actually wanted, the thing no amount of money replaces, was Roy on this stool showing me how to read the grain of a piece of wood so the stain lays down even. But he left me something bigger than money. He left me his belief in me when I had none in myself. He chose me when nobody else did. Not because I was brilliant. Not because I had credentials. Because I didn't walk away when it would have been so much easier to go. If you're somewhere tonight, and the people who are supposed to love you have decided you're not enough, I'm not going to promise you $36 million. But I'll tell you this. Your worth is not decided at anyone's dinner table. It's built in the quiet hours, in the early mornings, in the choices you make when nobody's keeping score. Roy taught me that with sawdust and patience and a single nod across a Thanksgiving table when no one else was looking. I put my hand flat on the workbench. The wood is cool and smooth. There are dents and scratches from 40 years of Roy's work. My hand fits right over the worn spot where his used to rest. Thank you, Grandpa. The bulb flickers once. Just the cold wiring. But I smile anyway. I pull the chain. The light goes off. I slide the door shut and walk back across the gravel toward the house where the kitchen window is glowing warm and I can hear someone laughing inside. It sounds like family. The real kind. That's my story. If it made you feel something, if you've ever sat in a room full of people who looked straight through you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Here's my question for you. If your grandfather left you a yellowed envelope with nothing but a phone number inside, would you call it or throw it away? Type I'd call or I'd toss it. I genuinely want to know. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I put out stories like this every week. And check the description below because there's a story about a wedding that completely fell apart, and I think you'll want to hear how that one ends. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. That means more than you know.